Chapter 9 For Birmingham to Washington. 1963 became widely for the ECLC and Martin Luther King. He had had success in Montgomery and Greensboro, but now, for the first time, he failed. The ECLC tries to end segregation in Albany, Georgia. They fought against the town government and the police for almost a year, but at the end of the year, Albany's schools, library, and parks were still segregated. King has lost in Albany. Now he needed to win somewhere. He started to think about Birmingham, Alabama. Birmingham was one of the worst cities in the country for young people. It was sometimes called Birmingham because there had been so many bomb attacks on houses and churches in black neighborhoods. There had been 18 of these attacks in the last 6 years, but no one was ever arrested for them. The chief of the Birmingham police was a man called Bull Connor. When the ECLC organized protests in Birmingham, but no one ever arrested for them. The chief of the Birmingham police was a man called Bull Connor. When the ECLC organized protests in Birmingham, Connor's policemen beat the protesters and attacked them with dogs. Hundreds of protesters were hurt and hundreds were arrested. King was one of the protesters who went to prison. When he was imprisoned, he read that some white church leaders had called for an end to the protest. They said it was not the right time for protest. King was angry when he read this. He wrote a letter to the white churchmen. In it, he said, "You said it's not the right time to protest. You say, wait. For years, I have heard the word wait. For too many years, black people had waited. Too often wait means never." There was a problem with the protest. When men and women were arrested and put in prison, they often lost their jobs. It was difficult for black families when their fathers and mothers were imprisoned. Why not ask young people to join the protest? King said, plenty of school children wanted to join the protest in Birmingham because they wanted to help. Freedom was as important to them as it was to their parents. Some black leaders were worried about this plan. These young children will get hurt when the police attack, they said, but King's reply was, segregation will hurt them even more. In the 2nd May 1963, 50 children aged from 6 to 18 marched to the center of Birmingham. They were arrested and put into prison. Then other 50 did the same. They were also arrested and put in prison. Then another 50, then another. By the end of the day, 1,000 children were imprisoned. Birmingham's prisons were full. At first, the police were too surprised to do anything, but next day they came with police dogs and powerful water hoses. Men, women, and children were knocked down by the power of the water and attacked by the dogs. When the protesters were shown on television, the violence of the Birmingham police shocked many Americans. Black people were attacked by police just because they wanted the same rights as white people. People all over the country knew that this was not right. They knew that things had to change, and people in other countries were shocked too. How was this possible in a country like the United States of America, the land of the free? People began to ask questions about freedom in America. Why it only for white America? What about black Americans? Birmingham agreed to stop segregation in the schools and on its basis. King had won the battle. Later in the year, he had his finest moment. In the summer of 1963, President Kennedy tried to get a new civil rights laws. Civil rights leaders organized the biggest protest march of all to support the president. They wanted people from all over the country to go to Washington, D.C. and ask for equal rights for Black Americans. On the 28th of August 1963, more than 250,000 people came to Washington and marched to the Lincoln Memorial. They were speeches and songs. Finally, Martin Luther King stood up and made the greatest speech of his life. "I have a dream," he said. In the American of his dream, blacks and whites were equal and lived together in peace. The speech was shown on television all over the world. People cried when they heard King's words. Thoroughly, things must change now, they thought. The country was full of hope for the future. But later in that year, 1963, America was once again shocked by terrible violence. Chapter 10. This country is sick. A month after King's Washington speech, there was more violence again in Birmingham, Alabama. A bomb was thrown into a black church and 4 young black girls were killed. King's message did not change, but the bomb made it harder to persuade people that not violence was the answer. On 22 November 1963, President John F. Kennedy was shot dead in Dallas, Texas. King had known Kennedy well and worked with him. They had argued about the best way to win equal rights for blacks, but they had agreed that equal rights for all must come soon. Like most Americans, King was shocked by Kennedy's death. This country is sick, he said. Sometimes he thought about his own death. Perhaps somebody hated King enough to kill him too. He wondered about the new president. Lyndon B. Johnson came from the South. What was his policy on segregation? Did he want to end it, like Kennedy, or to continue with it? Nobody knew the answer yet. After his Washington speech, King became famous all over the world. When people thought of the fight for civil rights in America, they thought of Martin Luther King. In 1964, he won the Nobel Peace Prize for his civil rights work. He was only 35 years old, the youngest person and only the second American ever to win this important prize. At the end of 1964, Time magazine named him Man of the Year. King's work continued. In the South, very few black leaders were elected to government. Before people could vote, they had to register. Very few flagged this list because it was very difficult. In Mississippi, for example, only 7% of blacks were registered to vote. He realized that he had to get blacks to register and then vote. That was the best way to change the segregation laws in the South. Registering black voters was difficult in many states, but Alabama was one of the worst. More than 300,000 blacks in this state wanted to vote but were not registered. King was asked to help black voters to register in Selma, Alabama. Selma was a small town of 30,000 people. Half of the people in Selma were black, but only 1% of them were registered to vote. If blacks wanted to register to vote, they had to pass a reading test. Almost all failed the test, although they could often read better than the whites who gave them the test. To register, blacks had to go to an office that was only open 2 days a month. The white people who worked in the office arrived late and left early. When blacks tried to register, they were often told to go away. King and the SCLC planned a protest march for Selma to Montgomery, 50 miles away. Montgomery was the state capital, and it was in this city that the arrest of Rosa Parks had started the battle for civil rights. The march started on 7th March. Police met the marchers on the road to Montgomery and told them to go back. When the marchers refused, the police attacked them. They beat the protesters and one man was killed. Once again, people all over the world were shocked by police violence against peaceful protesters. President Lyndon B. Johnson ordered the Selma police to protest the march. On the 21st March, the march from Selma to Montgomery started again. It took 5 days, but this time there was no violence. When the march entered Montgomery, there were 25,000 marchers, black and white. The leaders of the Alabama government, George Wallace, refused to meet the marchers or listen to their protest, but the message of the marchers reached the government in Washington. Later that year, Martin Luther King was there when President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Laws of 1964. This law protects the rights of all Americans to vote, and it was one of the most important laws of Martin Luther King's life. It made a big difference to blacks in the South. In 1963, only 6% of blacks in the South were registered to vote. By 1969, 66% were registered. No one could stop blacks from voting for their own leaders.